Hey guys, this is a quick technical rundown of some of the modding capabilities that we have in AI War 2 and the benefits that they have. I'm going to skip a lot of the really nuts and bolts technical details. I'll be happy to share those sort of things with you, but I think that would kind of get in the way of the core point of this video. Um, There are a lot of gotchas, such as things like external DLLs can't normally give you line numbers, which is a real problem during development. But by compiling with Mono, using batch scripts, and doing things along those lines, you can get around all of those gotchas. So with the things that you would normally bring up as an objection of, oh, you can't get line numbers, or oh, this or that is slower, or etc., it's actually we've found ways around all of that stuff. One of the chief benefits of this, if you don't even care about modding, is that in a standalone build, um, Keith is able to go from compiling in Visual Studio, he's the other programmer, to being in the game at the main menu with stuff fully loaded up in 7 seconds. That's ridiculously fast time frame, and that is due to a variety of things. I mean, solid state drive and all that notwithstanding, but originally it was about 30 seconds. We got it down to 7, and pulling things out into separate DLLs, not all of which have to be recompiled every time, is a big one. And part of the benefit or part of the reason behind multiple DLLs is that Mono will create shadow cache copies of those that are for your specific CPU architecture. And so if you're only making changes to code in some of it, then on load, it doesn't have to do that uh, shadow cache creation every time. And so if you're doing rapid iteration on your local machine, then that can save you quite a bit of time. If you're, coding something and then it's busted and then you test it again and back and forth, yada, yada, yada. The other thing is that typically shader compilation, super slow, and the actual encoding of all the mainly textures, but also meshes and so forth tends to be super slow as well. So pulling those out into a separate project and then using asset bundles is a big performance improvement, and this actually helps with modability as well. Um, with the asset bundles, um, if you store them in a format that is chunk based and not compressed, then you actually get the best performance. It's actually performing better than the shared assets or the resources folder. Um, there are performance issues using this approach if you're constantly pulling from it compared to using the resources folder. However, there are very straightforward ways to get around those performance things, which have turned a lot of people off using it. And I've made some wrapper classes that allow for local caching, and with those wrapper classes in place, my method is lower on um, transient garbage collector allocations, as well as actually performing better. And it's more flexible. You can use um, as many or as few asset bundles as you like. And one of the cool things about the asset bundles is that unlike the resources folder, they actually use full path names inside there. So rather than it being relative to the resources folder, if you've got a bunch of different resource folders inside your Unity 5 project, it's the full one, including the assets folder. Now, it also is referring to the actual name of the asset bundle. And so what that means is that you can have modders who are able to create asset bundles using a project that you create and hand to them, and they can then bring in their own sounds, textures, models, whatever, and they don't have to be able to get at your source ones. They can bring in their own without even having to get to yours. If there are naming conflicts between different mods, doesn't matter, because they are the only naming conflict that could possibly matter is if they actually name their asset bundle the same. If they just put their name, their handle, whatever, in the actual uh, asset bundle, um, then no problems. There's not going to be any conflicts. That brings us to how do we actually know what asset bundles to read in? In our case, we use XML for that. And so uh, that then gets to the question of, okay, fine, you're using XML, but how do you not wind up overwriting the XML files of modders? And so the way that we do that is that instead of having individual XML files, what we have is XML folders. And so you have a folder which has an XML, well, any number of XML files in it. And what we quickly do at launch, and again, we can do all this in 7 seconds for however many different, 36 different XML folders at the moment. We load this up and we say, okay, these are the folders that we're looking for. So for instance, here's the achievements folder. Now, typically this would be just one file, and in our case, it is, and we have however many achievements are in there. In other games, we've had a couple of hundred achievements in there. This is for AI War 2. We haven't gotten that far with it yet. But what we do have is where you can have um, individual uh, we have a whole data structure that automatically reads into things and that you can pull data from um, very, uh, very quickly. I'll go ahead and pull this up so you can see it. Um, so you've got things like uh, it arc and dynamic table row, arc and dynamic table, it tells generics. It's an instance class. You pull it in. It's got a node processor. It pulls in the data from an underlying XML thing, puts it into uh, actual classes that you can reference. Those things have an underlying row ID and internal name and some other things. So you can find them via a variety of different ways. None of that stuff, those are all details that aren't really important for the overall comprehension of what's going on. What's important is that we're able to look in here and say, okay, we know this folder will exist. It has some number, one plus ideally, XML files within it, and we can then read from all of those and pull in the data. Now, what happens if there are conflicts? In those cases, it's just whatever is last brought in is what's applied. So for instance, these usually have a name, which if there were two test entries, then it would pull from both of them in. Now, here's the really cool thing, is that in some cases, we have an override folder, which can be provided, and then players can put in their own stuff in the override folder. Now, if they do that, then uh, it will wind up pulling in the baseline stuff, whatever the underlying fields are. And then on top of that, any of the overrides that are actually declared, they will, as it says, override the base values, but only on a conditional basis. So if you wanted to say, let's say you're talking about a zombie in 7 days, and let's say that I wanted to override like how fast it moves, but I don't want to change its health or its model or any of that sort of thing. Or let's say I want to change its name and its model and how fast it moves, but nothing else. I could change any combination of any of those things, put that in the overrides folder for the zombies section, and any further updates to the official 7 days XML would not that would not impact my mod. Anybody else who's doing a mod that maybe I want to use Joe's mod as well as mine, um, I would not need to worry about conflicts between those two, like causing an actual break. Now, if Joe modded those things as well as me modding those things, then you do run into an issue of, okay, well, it's going to go in alpha order, and if my name starts with A and his name starts with J, then if he modded the speed and I modded the speed, his is going to be applied last and therefore be the thing that sticks. So we'll wind up with Joe's speed, my model, and the underlying base values for everything else. Uh, if you want to get fancy about it, then you can do things like say what Minecraft does, where you have a mods manager and you say what order the individual mods are applied in. That gets substantially more regimented, particularly when you've got a really big structure of different XML files that people might be pulling from. You might question why you would have so many different XML files, and the reason for that is simply so that you don't well, so that you can have an enforceable schema per thing. And I'm not talking about having like a I forget what those template file things are called that the W3 likes to tout. You really don't need that sort of thing. But having a schema that can be put into a wiki that people can look at and say, okay, I understand what this is and I can find it. And just also making it so that you can come in and look at it and make adjustments. In this particular case, we have some overall balance stats here, balance XML files, which then get read in by our particular entities. And in those cases, it's saying, it's making references by name to those different things. And we could even have multipliers against those if we want to. And therefore, we can do kind of sweeping balance changes when we have large numbers of entity types, which we do. So it makes it very quick to make large scale tuning as well as small scale tweaks on individual. So so you can make changes to whole groups of things or individual things as they relate to the group. And that sounds like that would add a lot of inefficiency, but the thing to remember is this is all read in once. It's all uh, applied in the order of operations that are laid out uh, based off the structure here, and then it's only reloaded if we hit the reload hotkey, which we usually use like Control F7, I think, for that. And that lets us do testing rapidly for if we want to adjust how the ships and entities are coming out in the balance, that sort of thing. But in a generalized sense, like I said, it's the actual reading in of the XML part. I don't know how long that takes out of those 7 seconds, but I would wager that it's under half a second of that. The reading in the large amounts of data for textures and meshes is certainly the bulk of the crunching that's going on there. It's a very strange thing, but the asset bundles actually do seem to read in faster, possibly because you actually get to specify what their compression is like. I'm not aware of you being able to do that with shared assets and the resources bundle. I don't know what kind of compression those use. I could probably look it up. I haven't seen that specified anywhere, but you can be very explicit about what it is you want here. And so if it's already being stored in say BC7 format, there's not really a reason to compress that yet further. Yes, you can save some space on the local computer of the player, but I think that the overall runtime speed, the load speed, and the ability to pull in and out of memory, those things as needed, trumps that by far. And if you are keeping your relatively quasi-compressed stuff under 3 or 4 gigs anyway, and that's your kind of target RAM availability for the let's say, well, at any rate, if you're keeping your texture counts low, that's really the big thing that is going to be the killer. And so um, there's no reason not to have that stuff stay in RAM once it's loaded, because then you reduce hitching during the game, which for VR, of course, is very important, but even for non-VR, it's certainly nice. And yeah, um, you can make it so that, well, one of the things that we did is we made it also so that you can, as a player, uh, like I said, you can do the XML, you can do the asset bundles, which cannot contain code. And then we even took it a step further and made it so that in our particular case, we have a thing called AI War external code, which is a solution that is open source and that has things that we don't mind sharing with the players, and these reference our DLLs, our closed source DLLs, and it has a lot of our UI stuff in it, a lot of our map generation logic in there, and these are things that players can come in and alter if they want to, add to if they want to. A lot of these things, like the individual map types, for instance, you would declare, hey, this new map type exists via XML, and then it would find it via reflection in here. Now, normally I poo-poo reflection to a great degree because the efficiency of that is not good. But when you're finding an entry point into something that is then not using reflection further, it's quite efficient. So, uh, you know, it's a matter of finding the right tool for the job at any given time. And for things like our UIs, this doesn't use reflection whatsoever. And we're able to define these things via either XML or directly in code here. These are actually callbacks that do code calls that are associated with the actual XML definition. So, for a given button, you know, um, give me the text to show for that, and how often am I going to calculate the underlying data that would go with that text, because a lot of those calculations are expensive and you don't want to do that every frame. So it does those on an as needed basis, that sort of thing. So you can get pretty fancy with that, and you can let the players um, get into that sort of thing as well. There's not necessarily a reason to keep that sort of thing away from the players. Now, with these sort of external DLLs, um, unfortunately, that does mean that they're going to have the same execute permissions that the actual game does as well. So that means there's a whole host of security vulnerabilities that could arise. And so um, there are a couple of different approaches that could be taken to that. We looked at doing things such as security domains, um, the app domains with reduced security permissions and things of that nature. But making calls across app domains it incurs a very heavy performance penalty. And so you could do that for certain things that are not um, performance critical, like something that has to do with game load or even map seeding, you could do that. But for something that's frequently called, such as, like ongoing map generation, like the world gen type code in a voxel game, or for something like the UI, the performance is just abysmally slow if you're crossing app domains. So that's just a no-go, unfortunately. We do things such as reading these, since these are DLLs and we need to load them dynamically. You can There are actually some very simple ways that you can load those dynamically, of course. I mean, it's the nature of a DLL. But one of the funny things about that is that with the Unity editor, it will actually lock those permanently until you restart the Unity editor. And that means that you can't then recompile, which is pretty frustrating. So actually load those as byte arrays, pull those in uh, in the uh, turn those into an assembly in .NET itself, and then pull those across and load them from memory as you would off disk otherwise, and that gets around some of the other limitations. So there's a whole host of gotchas doing these sort of approaches. We've solved pretty much all of them. The one that we haven't is a security issue. So it boils down to and that's only applying to uh, if you actually want to let the players run managed code, and if it needs to be highly performant, um, you can just throw it in a reduced security app domain if it's something that just runs once, and it's okay if there's a half-second delay on it or whatever. Um, for anything else, security is fine already, because nobody's going to like harm your computer with XML or something that's in a asset bundle. So uh, that security one, I'm not sure that that's, we haven't found anything that's tractable for doing that. We could do, scanning for vulnerabilities, or scanning for things like, anything that uses the system.io or that uses reflection or a variety of other things. But there are some legitimate reasons that somebody might need to use certain things like that to actually reduce functionality if you go too far down that. So there's some give and take there. And if we wanted to put in those sort of scanning capabilities, we could do that um, at load time, but then that would probably add potentially 5 or 10 seconds of scanning for load time per DLL. I'm just guessing on that, but as a guess, I think that's in the ballpark. So there are ways around that, and one way around that is simply not allowing for external DLLs to be loaded by players, which is the traditional route. But the other route is just making player making doing compilation at runtime. Uh, that gets very non-cross-platform compatible though, because you don't know. I mean, there's not a consistent compiler on all of the different things. I'm going down a rat hole. Apologies. Anyway, you can get performance that is better, uh, whether or not you care about modding, by doing this sort of approach, this sort of split project approach. It does require some added gyrations, but you can get it so that it's faster for you to actually test things, as well as faster to load. Um, And in the new versions of Unity 5.6, they actually have some even faster capabilities by making it so that you can uh, not have it check external DLLs for possible upgrade requirements, which is very nice. And so that was slow to load, but that was just because this particular version of Unity had been out of um, this particular instance of Unity had been out of RAM for a while. I'd been doing other things. So this is the more typical load speed right there. In the Unity editor, it is slower than on the standalone, but um, that loaded a lot of data very fast there as it was getting to the start menu. So at any rate, this sort of project structure can be pretty useful. Um, and it's certainly what I would plan to use on Machine Sunrise, because it's very modder friendly, and it does not in any way get in the way of doing obfuscation. Um, you wouldn't want to ship a version that has things like uh, the yeah, I think it's MDB files that are the symbol files for the mono uh, DLLs, but internally you can use those, and then if you're just distributing via Steam, it's super straightforward to set up a rule that excludes those in case those ever accidentally get stuck in there. So there can be some pretty good, you know, idiot proofing on there, as well as just simply being uh, regimented about it to begin with. But the obfuscation uh, should work fine with the I think it should work fine with the MDBs. It may or may not. And even if it doesn't, then you can apply it uh, for the actual public builds. So uh, this doesn't have any bearings on keeping trade secrets, essentially. If you know, and then of course you can open source the parts that are not unique tech, so that players can rejigger those bits if you want to let them. Okay, so that was a little bit longer than I meant to spend on it, but there's a lot of subtleties with the asset bundles and things that you can do. There's a lot of subtleties with like editor components that you can put just on the asset prep side, and it's really, really handy. Um, the asset bundles themselves, when you're doing a new build for multiple platforms. I mean, you're used to that taking like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever per platform, probably, right? Depending on how your shaders are set up and all that sort of thing. Well, building an asset bundle, you're already specifying exactly what the platform is, and it has all this awesome caching on there, and it doesn't include any code. It includes shaders, but not other code. And so building these 600 plus meg asset bundles, um, a lot of times it takes, I mean, I can do it right now. I don't think it's going to take any time at all. Yeah, it doesn't do it. Well, no, it is. Apparently, there were a few changes. It only does the diffs. It's great because it's chunk based, and therefore it only does the diffs. And this one, again, is running slightly slower than normal right now because it's been not an active window for a little while. But generally speaking, worst case, it takes about 30 seconds. You only have to do it when you've actually changed textures, meshes, or sound, or whatever it is you've got in that particular asset bundle. You can make as many asset bundles as you want and just compile the ones that you want to. So if there's some things that you know are just never going to change, you can make that into a like never changes asset bundle, and that one maybe takes longer to compile. And then the ones that are more volatile, uh, you're building those more frequently. And at this point now, that asset bundle can be read in instantly from the actual game here in the editor, and it actually can be read in by the standalone as well. I don't have to rebuild the standalone in order to get all the new assets that I just plugged in. And if I want to do an actual standalone build of the game, it will not be compiling any shaders. It will not be doing anything with any textures or meshes. It won't be compiling much code at all. There's a little bit of code here. Uh, yeah, 4 classes. That is the extent of the code in the actual uh, front end of the you really don't need to obfuscate that. There should be no reason to put anything that would be obfuscation worthy in this. So that makes that even faster. Plus, you can actually run better obfuscators potentially if you're putting it on external DLLs. And the external DLLs, of course, can be compiled at will anytime. And you don't have to rebuild the standalone for those either. So the need to rebuild the standalone pretty much only comes when when you're changing one of these 4 classes in the case of AI War 2, or if you're making some changes to your actual scene file, which should be pretty rare for a game that is largely procedural. And the actual build process winds up taking very little time. I haven't timed it recently, but um, a minute, 30 seconds, something like that. It's very, very fast. And when you're getting ready to do a new major push, you typically will not need to do a new rebuild because you're probably not, once you're out of early alpha, you're probably not really making changes to any of this stuff with any frequency. So when you do a new push, you're going to be pushing asset bundles and obfuscated, if you want, why not, encrypted DLLs. It's not really a huge point to that because you're going to have to decrypt it from within some sort of managed code, so your encryption key is going to be right in there. So you've added an extra step for somebody who wants to casually, look at your code, but with the decompiler. Um, so, but anybody who's hardcore after your trade secrets is not going to be, put off by that. So, uh, yeah, um, yeah, that's pretty much it. It really speeds up your workflow immensely while you're working, when you're pushing changes, and so on. You can push multiple new builds in a day um, easily, and it plays very nice with things like the Steam diffing and so forth that it has as well. So, all right. Thanks for watching. I know this was long.